EJ, we'll just introduce ourselves. How's that?
It works.
I'm Ruth Odell. Works for you? Good. I'm Ruth Odell, and I'm here basically because of my own interest in this area. My background, for your benefit, is I graduated with a PhD from Mississippi State University, so sorry. And I have the degree in educational psychology and a long career in education. So I'm particularly interested in the field of education and how it can be informed by what we'll hear from the reason I'm involved in this, other than Barbara Phillips keeps suggesting to me that I should do it, was an experience that I had way back in April, right after the pandemic started. And I was seeing the disproportionate impact that the virus was having on African Americans. When I looked at the data, I immediately thought, oh my goodness, it's the same kind of discrepancies that we see in school systems. And at the same time, I had been contracted to teach a workshop for Georgia administrators, administrators who wanted to move up to the central office. I have done that frequently over the years. Of course, it had to be on Zoom this time. And because of that pandemic data, I decided I wanted to do it I was already going to do it on change leadership. But instead of just pure change leadership, I decided I want to try to do something with equity in the school system. Well, and it was a total failure. And you know how that's good to fail. You know, you don't feel good about it at the beginning, but at least you do learn a lot from failing. The group of administrators I had, I'd say the white administrators, they were mildly interested, and they were mostly continuing to go back to the same sorts of strategies that we usually use in order to work with groups that might be struggling. The Black administrators were a lot the same, but some of them did talk about the importance of having Black teachers. But I actually offended 2 or 3 Black administrators who actually complained to the person that had contracted me to do the workshop. And so, of course, I was just kind of heartbroken that I would have done anything like that. So I was trying to figure out what it is that I had done. And I realized after I talked to my mentor, Barbara Phillips, she got me to thinking about some different things. And I realized that I really wasn't prepared to talk about this topic. And the things that perhaps I had used in the past to discuss things were not appropriate anymore. And I needed to figure out some new ways. So I began to search, and this is before the George Floyd incident. And of course, it just became even more important after that. So I began a study that has continued for me for several months now, and I'm writing a blog and some other things that are really keeping my interest up. But Katrina Caldwell was wonderful enough to suggest to me as a partner for this would be EJ Edney from the University of Mississippi, and who has been doing book studies like this on campus. So I want to turn it over to him and have him introduce himself to you.
Thanks so much, Ruth. And I'm really, really happy to be here today. I know that this is a tough topic for us to discuss, but anytime I see this many people interested in having this conversation, it makes me excited. Part of that excitement, I think, is thoroughly linked to who I am as a person. And so I'll give you briefly a spiel about who I am. I'm born in Mississippi, raised most of the time in Clinton, Mississippi, to 2 parents who went to Alcorn State University, one of which father ended up being president of Alcorn State at one point. And so you can imagine my parents' confusion when I decided that I wanted to come to the University of Mississippi. And at that time, I would probably tell folks that it was because of Melissa Cole, who was a couple of years before me, who was from Jackson and who I had the hots for around the time that I was making that decision. But I think that now I have language to understand the ways in which I saw this institution as better than Alcorn, and in ways that are related to things we'll be able to discuss in this book. So I can admit that. And I think a lot of students, in my admission of that, in my coming to recognize what was occurring and how I made those decisions, I realized that a lot of other students from the state of Mississippi would make that same decision. It's not to disparage this institution. I'm proud of its resources and the opportunity that it provides. But I know because of that choice and my process of coming into awareness about that choice, that other students would be confronted with that reality too. And that they would need resources, support, guidance. It's not even about what they would need. This institution would need structural revision, structural changes in order to better support students who would make that choice and show itself truer to its mission to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those opportunities, because of a lot of the folks on the call who had similar frustrations, I was given an opportunity around that time to work on a team to help develop the Center for Inclusion and Cross-Cultural Engagement. Val Ross was really instrumental in helping to create those opportunities and get me connected with folks, and was able to hire the first director and ultimately become the second director. So I'm now the second director of that center. I'm here in this call, Ruth, alluded to kind of my name being dropped in a conversation with Dr. Caldwell, but the reason that I wanted to participate in this one and talks like it is because this book in particular frees me from this perception of and helps and gives me another text to be able to point to show people that this is not about you being a good or bad person. This is about what your actions show at any given point in time. And if we can kind of release ourselves from that expectation, we can become more receptive to feedback in ways that we can show it better for folks. And we can, also show each other more grace as we learn more about all of these different aspects. So we've got a couple of questions that we've prepared, and Ruth and I will kind of go back and forth with those and answer. And then we will turn to you all to ask questions from you and hopefully have a rich and robust conversation. So thanks for indulging me. That's a bit about me. Excited for us to get into the conversation.
Great. One of the book's central messages you've kind of touched on a little bit is that the opposite of racist is not racist, that it's really being an anti-racist. And of course, as you said, the good news is that there's hope for everybody in this, that it's not a judgment on you, it's more the way you adopt policies and behave and that kind of thing. So would you go more into that and explain to the people who are listening?
Absolutely. I don't think that we understand the depths at which we have practiced our participation in these systems. And in being in such an individualized society, Western culture really looks at the actions of the individual. It's hard to then connect, your daily activities and choices to the perpetuation of larger systems that have impacts for folks. And so what we end up doing is learning that I shouldn't say, this, or I shouldn't do this. These overt things that we learn to call racism. And that if I'm not doing those things, if I'm committing to at least omitting those things from my experience, then I am not a racist. What we don't think about when we do that, though, is that means that nothing that I do or nothing that I say can then be, right? Because if someone tries to bring something to my attention that I said or did that had racist impacts, it doesn't square with my image of self, right? Because racists have to be bad. I have found a lot of power in acknowledging the fact that we are all more aware of the privileges that we don't have than the ones that we do. To extrapolate that awareness to other spaces where I can consider myself a good guy, but also understand how I've harbored ideas about people across several different identities. And I think in kind of freeing yourself up from that black, white, good or bad person, right? You get to look at your individual actions and think about, and I'll have an opportunity to tell you how this has shown up in my own work, even in my best effort to create opportunities for students and so on and so forth. But it really does give you some freedom to be able to say, this thing that I said, or this thing that I did, or this idea that I had comes from a place that's misinformed, that is has been intentionally set up to kind of veil what it does for other people. It to prevent me from taking this idea to its logical conclusion and seeing its real impact on individuals. I think that's a really good question for us to start, and I'd love to hear your response to it as well.
Okay. One of the things that you and I had talked about to this was the whole idea of helping Black people. And I really began to see that in my workshop that I had done, and my intense interest, passion to get rid of these gaps, I was playing into that. I was being what Kendi would call an assimilationist. I was insinuating to the administrators that there was something wrong with these children, even though I certainly didn't really think that. At least I thought I didn't think that. I did. I mean, that's the impression that I was giving. So I feel like I was acting in that moment in what I was saying and doing as an assimilationist. And I really, of course, I'm not a segregationist, but I wasn't being anti-racist at that moment by the way that I was presenting it. And I didn't see that until I read this book. And it really gave me a whole new look at things. Another part of that is that when we have policies that result in inequality, that we perpetuate that inequality. In fact, we give people the excuse, really, of saying there's something wrong with those people, if that makes sense. So a lot of the things that I've done over the past to try to help with equity, or really maybe have backfired in the sense that I have insinuated or given the idea or an excuse even to people, or pressured people into feeling that way, that there's something wrong with these children. So if there's something wrong with them, then I don't want them in my class. I've set up a situation in which you may not want that child. And that's horrible. That's a horrible thing to feel. But it was good for me to see that my energy should go towards getting rid of some of the things that were making children feel like they were incapable, and making the people who work with them feel there's going to be something terribly difficult about this if I give you this child. Yep. And but it was good to also know, well, I can quit doing that. It did not mean that I don't think they're worthwhile, or that they're completely equal to me. But by doing all these things, I was creating the opposite feeling, which gets right to what you're talking about. One of the things that Kendi talks about is it's a memoir. I think that's real important for everybody to know if you haven't read it. This is his life. And he's very honest about his own experiences in his family, and how the racist thinking that he had along the way, and the insights he had. Could you talk about that in your life, especially as a Black person, that, for me to say some of these things, I think it's got more impact sometimes for somebody like you to say it.
Yeah. So I alluded to some of it you know, as I did my
Yeah.
introduction. You know, that's an idea that in some ways I think has origins there, right? It's I might not have described it in that way, and that might not have been the language that I would have used about what my decision was, but it has some origins there. But I've got a more tangible, what seems like more innocent example, and some people on the call will be familiar with the group, and this will be kind of a glimpse into my thought process and the things that I think about, and becoming more aware of these things in my work. So there's a group on campus called Men of Excellence. I've been a part of it since it started, as an undergraduate. And when we started the group, the guys are known for, you know, being a group of Black men on campus. When we're pictured on, you know, things that we participated in, they're usually wearing blazers and the same tie and a white shirt and khaki pants. And, you know, the whole curriculum was kind of built around helping Black men better navigate the University of Mississippi. There are needs there. There, as evidenced by retention and graduation rates, there are needs there. But having organized the group in the way that I did, the reason that the moment that I knew I misstepped, actually a Black professor who works really closely with students was in a building, a residence hall, and noticed that a lot of the Black males who would come through the residence hall would have clothing that he deemed inappropriate, sagging pants, or, you know, would be blasting music on their phones or something as they walk through his building. And he called a meeting with me and asked, would I help these guys? Would I bring them in a Men of Excellence to teach them how to better dress and how to better act? And it clicked for me that I've created something where people think that this is what makes Black men successful. And while I knew that in those meetings, I talked to them about code switching and how, you know, when I meet with them, it's, hey, what's up, man? How y'all doing? And that I'm not saying that, you know, in board meetings and things like that, right? Or that there should be value placed on both, and that there's actually a skill in us being able to do that and a fluency, and it speaks to our intelligence. And I knew that I was having those conversations. But everybody else, you know, who was looking at what we had on our website and all these things, thought that we had this assimilationist mission, right? And I was, if I'm honest, I had some of those things, right? I wasn't thinking deeply about, well, what's wrong with the university, right? Like, it is here to educate, and if it is not educating, right, this group with the same level of success as other groups, that's either an indictment on who that group is, or on the institution that's supposed to be educating them. And with me now being a part of that institution, I can either be racist in my thinking or anti-racist in my thinking. And that's just an example of how that shows up. It's something that I was doing out of a sense of altruism, and I thought it was the best thing to do, but it created a system where, you know, it suggested to other people something that I did not intend when you know, built it out.
Okay, well, and this is all pretty complicated to wrap your head around. It is not the same way that we normally go about. And most books that you read say a lot about, you know, you should feel really bad if you're a white person right now, you know, and you should get your consciousness erased in some way. And so I think especially progressive white women or progressive white people can oftentimes not see themselves in quite the same way that they need to. And this book has really helped me see. Plus, it helps you to see what things you should be putting your effort into in order to make a difference in your communities or in any of your organizations. Now, we're getting the warning that it's time for us to be quiet and to listen to your questions. I think Sammy's going to read those out for us, and we'll do our best. And I'm afraid other things that we might want to talk about will come up.
Y'all don't have to be quiet. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And this first question is actually directed to Ruth. It says, Ruth, have you thought about the helpful things that you've done and how they are features of policies that are rigged for inequality in ways that you've not realized before?
Yeah. Probably the single most thing that I would say, which if people were on this call that had worked for me in the past, would go like, what? I cannot believe you're saying that. And it would be all of the disaggregation of data that we do these days. It's the big push to always be looking at your data and always be putting people on plans and that kind of thing. It's not that that's not good, okay? But we spend an exorbitant amount of time working on data and trying different strategies. We don't put the same amount of time on, hey, let's systematically go through the policies and procedures and the training and everything that we're doing, and are they eliminating the barriers to begin with so that all children, everyone that's having low achievement or whatever, we won't work with them. But we have whenever we do that, we have a disproportionate impact on Black students. We do, when we group and we label and we talk about them that way. And so I would have to say that were I a superintendent again, I would go out of my way to downplay some of this data and these progress plans and this kind of thing, and work towards the policies and procedures that I had in place first. Then I'm not saying the other stuff's not good. So don't start writing all this bad stuff on there about that. But it's not the first order of business that we should be going to.
I want to chime in on that, and in that we should not measure whether something that we've done or decided to do is racist or anti-racist based on our intentions, because we've established that the folks on this call, we think we're good people. We should make those determinations on the outcomes, right? And so if my outcome was that this professor thought that I was a finishing school for Black males, you know, in my advisement of men of excellence, well, I mean, that evidence is something, right? It's not about my intention. It's about the what I've created, right? So I think even with good intentions in the process that you talked about, I think there are probably more superintendents who have good intentions than bad. But I think it's the unwillingness or whatever you do with the data that when you see it's not working for these students. How can people tell that you care? Can they tell that in your actions and in your change of action? Or do you, to what extent do you try to rationalize that away to just be the numbers, right? To just be how things fall, or to feel sorry that it's because of structural things that you convince yourself are outside of your power, right? So yeah, I really great points there. And if we can just look at our outcomes, what impact did it have as a measure of whether something is something we should continue to do, it might help.
Good deal. Okay, Wanda would like it noted that it's important to include all people of color class when trying to address racism. Thanks, Wanda. That is always an important reminder. Our next question is, how can we correct racist behavior in person without offending the person we're talking to?
What do you think, EJ? I've gone on a while.
I was reading this next question from Corey. I'm so sorry. One more time, if you don't mind.
Yeah. How can we correct racist behavior in person without offending the person we're talking to?
Well, I mean, so there are some tips and strategies on our site. When I stop talking, I'll drop a link to the Center for Inclusion's website. But I don't know if that's the right question, and I don't want to problematize folks' questions, but I don't always put the feelings of someone at the forefront. I assess intent to the best extent that I can in these instances, but because I have been in situations where it would have been nice for somebody to amplify, my concern or say something for me, I'm much more concerned with what happens if I tacitly approve of what just happened than I am about how they're going to feel about me saying something. And the other thing is that, this is a really, really good point, because this idea of good people not being able to be racist really does open up another conversation. So there's a really good YouTube video out there by a guy named Jay Smooth, where he talks about how you have a conversation about race, why they're so frustrating. Because we're trying to have a conversation about your decision, your posturing, your ideology, and why it, is going to have bad effects for a group of people. And you are responding to my assertion or my acknowledgement of that as if I called you a racist. There's two different conversations. One, that last one, if you take that as I'm calling you a racist, well, that's too easy to disprove. I've got white friends. I've got, I donate $10 to NAACP every day. I do this and I credential my way out of that. But we still didn't address what led you to bring this to my attention, right? Like that moment. It's not about who you are, it's about what you did, right? So first thing is make it about what the person did, because if you are right, that they are racist, because of something that they did, they can't, and these are his words, right? It's too easy for them to get out of that. And if you're wrong, you might have lost an ally. You see what I mean? So making it about what they did in that moment, there are lots of ways to do that. What did you mean by that? Silence there. Changing the subject. Appealing to morals. Hey, I know you to be a really, really nice guy. But when I heard this, I felt so-and-so, right? I feel statements. Hey, I heard this. Is this what you meant, right? All of those are different ways. I'll drop a link to some more resources so we can answer some other questions.
Okay, good deal. I'm going to go ahead and do the next question. This is from Valeria. During my work at the university, I have oftentimes heard that racism will go away if we just stop focusing on racism. Considering Kendi's text, what is your response to this? What happens when we ignore racist acts and behaviors? Also, what happens when we focus on racist acts? So that kind of ties in nicely to your last question. EJ did.
EJ muted himself again.
I got him. Go ahead.
I do think that racist acts are not always, of course, racist acts and behaviors, are important to do the things that EJ has already talked about. If we constantly, though, focus on people who are behaving a certain way at a certain time or using a certain language or that kind of thing, so we try to clean everybody up so they don't say anything wrong. I think we're missing the boat in there, okay? If we're not looking at the systemic issues that are causing the problem in the first place. So it's hard to, I'm not as good as EJ in talking about all this, but I do feel that was a growth for me to see. That just because I don't make jokes about Black people, just because I have Black friends that I can say, well, I have Black friends, just because I read a lot of books about Black people right now, all of these things those aren't anything that's that big a deal. What's more of a big a deal is, am I speaking up? Am I working against policies and actions by governments, by all kinds of organizations, healthcare, schools? Am I working to change those things? The power of doing that will remarkably help you take care of these other things. Because one of the things Kendi talks about in his first book that I have to give a plug for, Stamped from the Beginning, is to show you that the moment the Black people got off the boat, in 1619 and became slaves, at that point, it was the reason the people were selling slaves had to do with their own self-interest. It did not have to do with necessarily them thinking these people were subhuman. They just knew they could capture them, that other people would buy them. Once they did that, though, they created the racist attitudes. I can't buy somebody unless I can prove that they're inferior, that they're subhuman or whatever. So really a whole different way of looking at this than the way we're used to it, which is about appropriate behavior and appropriate dress and appropriate all this other stuff. So I would want to focus on other things, I think. EJ might have other thoughts on that one.
Well, I'm going to just chime right, because we're good people, right? And because with all these resources and civilization that we figured out, we owe it to the world to be able to propagate these things and provide these opportunities for these other communities that haven't been able to figure out on their own how to achieve the civilization that we have as a, right? And so it is that, right? It is you there's an action, you rationalize your way out of it, and it's built on this supposition, this foundation, this assertion, whatever you call it, this unrelenting desire that we have to be good, right? If you look at, some of the folks who rationalize their ways into, right, Black inferiority, these are some of the heroes of our nation's founding. Some of, people who are very heavily revered in history for their intellect, right, for their prowess in setting up government. So what happens when we ignore it, Val, is I think we, inadvertently give nods to the ways in which that has been, so built into our society that we don't question it. So some of us, ignore it because we don't have the awareness to even question. Some of us ignore for survival. I think that we, if there are a lot of things that my children, for instance, know not to do because I correct them, right? And if I don't say anything, sometimes they'll keep doing that thing because I haven't said don't, right? So we tacitly approve of these acts when we don't, right, take opportunities we can to challenge them. When we focus on them, though, I really do think it depends on what we've done personally, right? Because there was certainly, and there are certainly points in my own work where I am so consumed with, like, even at the time where I set up Men of Excellence, right? And I created this image where this guy thought that, that's what we were doing. Because there was some deficit, need in Black males for us to do that. I could still, even at that moment, tell you about all the racist stuff that was going on campus then, right? So it's about what have you done to be able to look inward as you focus on those racist acts. Because if you're just so hyper aware of all the ones that are occurring out and you haven't thought about the internalized things that you have, the anti-Black attitudes that even I have had as a Black male, then what you do is create a us and them, right? You create a boogeyman, you create your proverbial Mississippi that the rest of the nation needs in order to not be that. All you do is move the goalposts and say, hey, there's someone worse than me. I'm not doing that, right? And you just become very, very adept at identifying those things and not very good at thinking about your own participation and what opportunities you have to dismantle that.
I think another reason that we focus so much on that kind of thing sometimes is related to a question I see that Mary Bays asked me. So she's the sister of my daughter-in-law. I think I should answer her question, but it says that a lot of that comes from the top, is entrenched in the system. Would a superintendent get away with bucking the system but not focusing on data? And when you don't want to obey the rules, when you say there's something wrong with the rule or the procedure or the ritual or whatever, that's much more unpopular than if I say to you, really it is. It's a lot easier for me to say to you, I don't feel good when you say that to me in our individual conversation. But for me, in some kind of position that I might be in, to say something contrary to the way it's supposed to be, it takes a tremendous amount of courage. I mean, you could lose your job over not supporting the system in the way that it's done. So you'd have to it's not that I'm saying you should never look at your data, but what if I said, hey, let's look at our discipline system. Let's look at the way we're penalizing kids of all color based on minute little rules that we've come up with. And they're good rules. I mean, they're great. But how we go about teaching children when it's punitive in that way all of the time. And so much of the decision making about what is bad behavior has to do with race and people, how people feel about race, how people interpret you. No, I may think I'm very fair in my implementation of the discipline, but I'm not true. I'm more familiar with the white child sometimes, so they do the same thing that a black child would do, and it's more fearful to someone to see that done there. So, oh, you've got to go to ISS. Well, I'll call your parent and tell them what you've done. Two different things for basically on a piece of paper, the same incident. But that's because you're taking a punitive approach. So what if you were to take a more learning approach to what you were doing? Then you won't have the huge discrepancies that you have in discipline. You'll see that in every single district you would ever go to. If you looked at their discipline data, you will see more black children being put in school suspension or suspended or whatever than you do white children. So once again, are we going to spend all of our time on teaching, children of color by penalizing them? You're just creating a path to more incarceration, which we also, when we go out into the world, we see the same data in that. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people that don't need to go to jail, and I don't say there's not people that don't need to be in in-school suspension. But when you see that kind of data difference, you've got to look at the system, not just the people. It's not deficiencies in people as much as it is deficiencies in systems.
I think that is a great place for us to stop rather. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, EJ. We are going to let Richard on so we can do some closing announcements for us. If it's going to work this time, I really hope it is. I've clicked unmute, so he should be popping up on your screen any minute now.
Can you hear me?
You are a little hard to hear, Richard.
It says I'm not on. Okay. Well, just cut me off if you can't understand me. I'm going to start talking. Cut me off when you don't understand me. I just want to announce the upcoming events, but first, I want to thank Ruth and EJ for hosting today and doing a great job. That was an interesting conversation. We try to keep it short so people will want more, but I could have listened to y'all for another hour at least. On September the 8th, Eddie Glaude will be here. Y'all know him if you watch MSNBC. He's a native of Moss Point, Mississippi, and the author of a new book, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. He teaches at Princeton. I think he's director of the African American Studies program there. And he's going to be paired up with Kiese Lehman. I know a lot of y'all know Kiese or know who he is. A senior writer at the University of Mississippi and author of several books, including most recently Heavy, which is just a wonderful, wonderful book. On October the 15th, Connor Town O'Neill will be our guest. He has written a book called Down Along with That Devil's Bones. He spent a lot of time looking at Nathan Bedford Forest monuments, trying to figure out what that was about. As all of you know, I'm sure Forrest was a prisoner's general in the Civil War. He wasn't a general, but he was responsible for the slaughter of all the black soldiers at Fort Pillow. He was the founder of the KKK. You know all this. Anyway, he chases down all this stuff about monuments, about Nathan Bedford Forrest. One of the things that he says, which I think is interesting and true, is what these monuments mean is less about the person they depict than they are monuments to the power of those who build and maintain them. So that'll be interesting. In November at a date that's not yet firm, University of Mississippi political science professor Marvin King will be in conversation with Stuart Stevens, another Mississippian. Probably many of you are familiar with him. He was on the presidential campaigns of 5 Republicans who ran for president, 2 of whom won. And he has, his book is called It Was All a Lie. He's done a sort of a mea culpa. And about being everything that's wrong with Trump as it is about being wrong with the Republican Party, which is really quite something for him to say. And he thinks the chief problem with the Republican Party is racism. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. So tune in. All that stuff's on the Square Books website. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Sammy, Ruth, EJ, thanks again. And y'all have a good evening. Thank you.
Real quick note, if you missed any part of the session, this will be going up on our YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out there. And thank you all so much.